Hi, I'm Riley Moynes, author of The 4 Phases of Retirement and its sequel, The 10 Lessons. We're speaking with people who are squeezing all the juice out of their retirement. People with widely divergent backgrounds, experience, and expertise. People with stories that can inspire and encourage you too to squeeze all the juice out of your retirement. Thanks for joining us for today's conversation. Here we go. Our guest today is Tim Burrows. Tim has owned and driven battery electric cars since 2013 and has logged over 200,000 kilometers without the need for gasoline or diesel fuel. He now takes advantage of the flexibility retirement affords to share his EV experience with others and to break down many myths and misconceptions about EV or electric vehicle ownership. He speaks regularly to groups including several Probus clubs, schools, industry associations, and church groups. He's a member of the Electric Vehicle Society, a nonprofit organization which works to promote understanding and adoption of electric mobility in Canada, where he chairs the Society's Etobicoke chapter. Tim, thanks for joining me today.
I'm glad to be here, Riley.
Great, let's talk. Give us some background, Tim. When you were still working and you were still kind of full-time, tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll transition into your post-working interests.
Sure. Well, I spent most of my career actually in the beverage alcohol industry, working through the industry at a winery for many, many years. And then for the last 12 years of my career, I was working at a distillery. So it was kind of a different path than I ended up on today.
Tell me some of the background about how you got interested in electric vehicles, and I know you're passionate about them right now.
Yeah, it was really kind of the last couple of years that I was working that I started to follow this one particular company called Tesla, and was watching what they were doing, and I was quite fascinated by really the technology that they were working with. I could imagine driving a car that was running on electricity and what that must be like. And so after a lot of research and a lot of hesitation, I took the leap and purchased an electric car. And I drove it for the last year when I was working. Mm-hmm. So it was the real world. It was not a hobby at that point. It was my only means of transportation. Mm-hmm. And it turned out to be terrific. It was everything I thought and more.
How did you decide on Tesla as opposed to some other options that might have been available at the time?
Well, back then, 2012, those were very early days for today's generations of electric cars. Sure. So there weren't a lot of options. There was a Nissan Leaf, and I think at the time it had very limited range, right. Was looking very promising, but I needed more range than that. And so really it was about the range that convinced me that Tesla was the way to go. And also just their forward thinking. They were doing a lot of things that seemed to me very advanced, and it was very attractive to me.
Right. So do you see your interest in electric vehicles as a kind of a variation or adaptation of your earlier work, or is it kind of truly a new direction for you?
Well, I wasn't in technology, so in that sense, it was quite different. However, the activities that the electric car interest sort of pulled me into seemed quite similar to a lot of the things that I, in fact, was doing in my working career. Mm-hmm. So I guess the answer to the question is there are a lot of similarities. It was a lot of things that I do now with this hobby mm-hmm. and with this passion are very familiar to me because I did them all the years I was employed.
Sure. Now, to what degree would you say your interest and involvement in electric vehicles has kind of changed your life? That may be putting it a little bit dramatically, but what sort of changes has it brought for you?
Well, it's sort of brought back the interest in driving. Because of my career, I drove an awful lot. And frankly, I really didn't enjoy it near the end of that career. Mm-hmm. But when I switched to an electric vehicle, I suddenly found a renewed joy in traveling, and in fact started to drive a lot more than I had previously.
Right.
I drive a lot now in my retirement. So that was one major change that it brought about, and of course there are others.
Right. Now, your home life, has that changed significantly since you got involved in electric vehicles?
Well, you see, my wife had retired some years before I retired, and kind of had found her own way, her own pathway, and was she's a very busy and active person, but she sort of had that stream of living that was apart from me. And so when I retired, one of my concerns, of course, was how is that all going to fit together? And it turns out that it gives us productive time apart, which I think turned out to be kind of important.
Do you have a non-electric vehicle in your household, or are they all electric?
I have to confess that at the moment we still have a non-electric vehicle.
Okay.
We have a small SUV that my wife uses, but won't be for very long. We've been moving towards the point where we will replace that, and I expect within the next year that will become an electric vehicle as well. So we'll be a two-car electric family.
Okay, you'll be all in.
All in, absolutely.
Tell me about how did your speaking circuit develop, and I understand that you're doing a lot of that right now. Give us some background on that one.
Sure. Well, I kind of fell into it. I wasn't planning on this in retirement. It wasn't something I thought I would be doing. But as it happened, a neighbor, a fellow who lives across the road from me, and who was aware that I was now driving an electric car, belonged to a local Probus club. And so he approached me and said, would you be interested in coming to our club and telling our members about electric cars and what it's like to have one? So I kind of thought about it, and I thought that sounded like maybe a fun thing to do.
Sure.
And off I went. I put together a little presentation. I went to the little watered-down Probus club here nearby, and it turned out to be a really thrilling experience. People reacted very favorably to it. And from that talk, I had two people approach me who belonged. One was a church, and I can't remember the other organization the other person belonged to, but said, would you come and tell that story to my group and my members? So it kind of spread from there. I did one, I got two from that, and then pretty much every time I go out and do a talk, there would be at least one person, maybe two, in the group that wants me to come and speak at their group. Sure. So it kind of just spread like that. Yeah. It was kind of fun.
Yeah, word of mouth. Now, I understand that you've spoken to some really young kids in school, some kindergartners, did you say?
Yeah, I was asked to come to a kindergarten class, and of course, by that point in time, my electric car deck was pretty sophisticated and pretty in-depth. And of course, I had to rewrite that a little bit just to fit the audience. And I fortunately have a good friend who was a retired kindergarten school teacher. And so I reached out to her, and she gave me some tips, and it actually worked really well. I did a couple of classes, and they responded quite well. The teachers seemed pretty pleased.
Right. What sort of questions did the kids ask you?
Well, I converted the whole topic to energy. So rather than trying to talk about, I would show them the car and explain how this was different. It didn't have an exhaust pipe. And they said, well, and they ask a lot of the similar sorts of questions. Where do you get the energy to drive the car? And I said, well, it's a plug. And it was kind of basic, but it starts somewhere, right?
Sure, and most of them will be driving electric cars.
Well, I predict that all of them will. I think that a kindergarten person today, a kindergarten age person, will be driving electric, and they probably won't have a choice.
Right. Now, I know that in some situations you take your audience out into the parking lot and give them a real live view of all the wonderful things that your car can do. Tell me about that one.
Yeah, weather permitting and time permitting.
Size
yes, that's right.
Of group, sure.
I always offer that if people are interested in stepping out after the talk to see the car in the real world. It just so happens that Tesla does a little show and dance, a light show and a music show, and flaps the doors, and it puts on a couple of minute presentation all by itself. And people really like to see that.
Yes.
And now with recent updates, you can actually be moving the car with your phone, and it will come to you like a dog. So if it's out in the parking lot, it'll find you and come to you. So it's pretty interesting to watch.
That'd be impressive. You're now, I think, working on your second Tesla. The first one was the Model S?
Correct, yes.
And how long did you have that?
I had that a little over 4 years. I drove it. When I sold it, it had about 130,000 kilometers on it, so I'd done some pretty good drives. We'd driven to Florida and out to the East Coast. I believe we were the second electric car to go around the Cabot Trail. So, and those were early days. There weren't a lot of chargers, but they were there if you just did a little research to find them.
Okay.
And of course now that's becoming a lot easier.
Sure.
But yeah, had that for 4 years, and then I sold it to a friend who remains a good friend, which is a good sign, and purchased a Tesla Model X, which is a bigger SUV vehicle and has newer technology such as the autopilot and semi-autonomous capabilities.
Right. One of the concerns that I know that people have as they consider the possibility of electric is just this question of, will I run out of energy, and what happens if I do? How do you address that, or how do you deal with that in your own situation?
There are a number of really interesting points that you learn once you've had a car. I'm going to set Tesla aside for a second and say any electric car.
Sure.
First of all, a little bit of an adjustment to your thinking is that with an electric car, you're going to leave that car plugged in when you're finished with it every day. And as a result of that, when you wake up in the morning, you're always going to start a day with a full, I'll say tank, full battery. Yeah. And when you think about it, how many of us get in our cars in a typical day and drive 300 plus kilometers? It just doesn't happen.
Right.
So this notion of range anxiety, well, I totally understand it, is something that disappears once you've owned an electric car, even for a relatively short time. You don't need chargers out in the wild very often. I will say that I would say 95% of the time, electric car owners simply refuel while they sleep at night. Doesn't matter whether it takes an hour or 4 hours to refill. It's just done overnight.
Sure. But on those longer trips, and you say you've driven to Florida, there must have been some planning involved that would involve stops that would be longer than would ordinarily be the case to gas up.
Yeah. You're spoiled in a Tesla, again, because Tesla was set themselves up to be an electric car company. And as such, they anticipated the concern over range. And they were very clever. They started building their own really fast electric charging network right across North America. Also in Europe and China and Australia. They're amazing. So with those particular fast chargers, where you can get a charge on a long road trip, you have to stop and charge. You can get a charge in 20 minutes, 15 minutes sometimes, not to 100%, but the car is smart. And if it sees your destination, it will charge you, it will send you a message as soon as you have enough charge to get to your destination. It won't keep you waiting. Again, it's not like a gas car where every time we stop, we think we need to fill it all the way up.
Right.
You don't need to do that. So their fast chargers are all over North America. Driving to Florida and back is a breeze.
Amazing.
And I should add that for non-Tesla owners, it's good news too, because for example, Petro-Canada has now committed to putting in really fast charging right across Canada along the Trans-Canada Highway. And very recently, Ontario Power Generation made the announcement that within Ontario, they're building, I believe, 24 very fast charging stations on our roadways. So fast charging is becoming very common for that 5% of the time that you need it.
Right.
Again, 95% of the time,
you're
going to charge at home.
Right. Now, Tim, when I saw your presentation, you referred to a golden age back in the 60s or 70s in California, where there was a real push on electric cars that kind of came to a dead end.
Well,
Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think, Riley, you're talking about the General Motors EV1 car, which was the first sort of recent times venture into the electric car world. And they built an all-electric, it's a small car, but all-electric. And the folks that drove that car absolutely were passionate about it. They fell in love with it. But General Motors didn't sell those cars. They only leased them. And the time came, I think it was around 1992, they actually pulled the plug on that project and they recalled all of those cars. They had to pry them out of the owner's hands.
Right.
And in fact, they were virtually all crushed.
And why was that?
Well, why was that? It's a really good question. General Motors makes the case that there was no business model or no business case for that car at that time. But the people that were driving them seemed to think differently. So I think one of the reasons that is stated is that at the time, California was requiring auto manufacturers to significantly reduce emissions.
Right.
And the auto industry sued California and won. So they no longer had to make cars with low emission. And that's sort of when the EV1 disappeared.
Lucky we're not cynical enough to think that the big motor manufacturers and perhaps even the oil industry might have had something to do with that.
I don't want to go down the conspiracy road. I have my thoughts on that.
Tim, in our podcast series, we're talking about squeezing all the juice out of retirement. So when you hear that phrase, what does that mean to you?
I think it means staying active. It means doing the things that you really enjoy doing, and perhaps doing some things that you could not do or you didn't have time to do during your working life. And so I think that really it means feeling satisfied at the end of the day, that you've done something meaningful, and it gives you something really to look forward to when you get up the next day. Right. If you don't have that, and it could be, it can be anything, everybody's different, but if you don't have that feeling, that sense that you've got something to get up for in the morning, then you're not squeezing the juice.
Right. So if someone were to ask you for your advice as to how best to do that, to squeeze all the juice out, what advice would you be giving them?
I would tell somebody to look back over your life and try and pick out those things that you did that you really enjoyed doing. Maybe make a list of those things, and then look for ways in the current time frame to put those things back into action. And really, you have to do a little self-evaluation to think about what things you really enjoy doing. Like recognize that in yourself, and then you have to find ways to pursue it. It won't come to you. You need to actually take some action.
Right. And we know that with increased longevity, there's a very good likelihood that many baby boomers, about 10,000 of them a day retiring, are going to spend quite likely up to a third of their lives in retirement. So it becomes even more critical to find something that you really are interested in and that is meaningful to you and significant. Tim, the other theme that we're working on here is this idea of don't retire, rewire. And what does that mean to you when you hear that phrase?
Well, I think it means you have to, and I'm going to go back to my earlier comment about finding those things that you like to do in your working life. And you may have to make some changes to be able to continue to do those things, or to find even new things that you like to do. You have to rewire a little bit. It might be a totally different. If you like painting all your life, but you can't do it anymore, maybe you learn how to sculpt. It's still an artistic expression. And it's that kind of thing where the skill set that you developed and enjoyed using can be applied to a totally different subject matter. Yeah. And that's what it means, rewire if you need to.
Yeah. So Tim, what do you have planned for the future?
Well, because my passion right now is electric cars and that whole industry and how the automotive industry is evolving, I can't help but recognize there's a tipping point coming. Right now, when I go to a car show with my electric car, or when I offer to do a talk about electric cars, there's a great deal of interest in it, because we're on the cusp of something very, very new and different. Yeah. But I also have to recognize that 10 years down the road, that won't be such a novel thing. And maybe people won't want to hear me come out and talk about electric cars because they'll be taking them for granted. So I have to be, I think about that, and I think about how my subject matter is going to need to evolve with the technology. And it doesn't mean I need to stop going out and doing talks for groups, but I need to think about, maybe I won't be talking about electric cars as much as I'll be talking about self-driving cars and the impact that will have on society, or something similar. Sure. So that's when I think about the future, that is for sure top of mind to me, because I already find, by the way, the questions I'm asked after I do an electric car talk have changed. They used to be very basic, like how far can you go and where do you charge? And more people in my audiences already have figured that part of the equation out. And they're asking things like, well, I live in a condominium, an old condo. How am I going to charge my electric car if I get one? And so, those questions are evolving, and I think they will move off the page a little bit.
And you responded to that question during the presentation that I saw about the condos.
Yeah.
What's happening in the condo world?
Well, there is a whole industry that's growing and developing that specifically deals with technology that is necessary to manage a fleet of car charging. You can imagine an old condominium with only enough power coming into it to charge maybe a dozen cars, but there are 50 cars in the garage. Well, what happens when 50 cars are electric? Well, this technology that's come forward will stage those charges. So it will take the available energy or power, and all you have to do at the car point is to say, I need my car by 8 in the morning or 10 in the morning, and it will get everybody a charge, but not all at once. That's the challenge there. And that applies to a lot of things. Like we don't need a lot more energy in our society here to charge if every car became electric. We don't need that much more electricity. But if everybody tried to charge at the same time, we'd have a problem. So again, this is that kind of technology that looks like, how do you manage the flow of energy demand? And there are some other exciting things too in that field, where all the electric cars plugged in could become could be feeding energy back into the grid, so that when energy is really expensive to buy, you could actually sell it from your car battery that charged when the energy rates are low. And if there's a power outage in your neighborhood, well, all these cars plugged in could act as backup power until the power came back on. And with this amazing technology now, they can microcharge. This tiny bits of electricity needed from your car and many others to the grid, you can get paid for that, and it can be small little bits just back and forth, and it keeps track of it. And so there's just a lot of interesting stuff.
So it may switch from some of the basic questions you're answering today to bigger questions that become important down the road.
That's right. And it's going to be challenging for me because I'm not a highly technical person. But as I say, that what fascinates me is technology, what technology can do for us, not necessarily how it works.
Now, Tim, one more question about this charging thing. In your own home, what did you have to do to accommodate your Teslas?
Sure. So we're a little bit on the lucky side in as much as this house was built with a 200 amp electric panel. And so my first Tesla had the capability of charging at 80 amps, 240 volts. I said I wasn't technical, but here I go. It's not that complicated really, but 80 amps and 240 volts, which is a lot of power. To deliver 80 amps to the car for a maximum fast charge, I needed to take 100 amps away from my 200 amp panel to dedicate to that. You can't do 80 at the panel and 80 at the car. So anyway, I just put in a separate circuit breaker for the car and put in I used a Tesla wall-mounted unit to plug into my car, and away I went. You don't need that much. I was new and nervous. I thought I needed a really fast charge at home. That's not necessary. Really, think of it as the chargers are built into all electric cars. So the thing you put in your garage really isn't a charger, even though that's what we call it. The thing you put in your garage is a plug outlet for your car to plug into. And so all you really need is something that's equivalent to an electric stove or electric dryer. So 30 amps, even 20 amps at 240 volts, which is a standard kind of thing in most houses, will charge an electric car very easily.
You know, if you're interested in having Tim come to speak to your group or an organization that you might be part of, he can be reached through his website, timtalkstesla.com, or by email, timtalkstesla@gmail.com. Tim, thank you so much for being with me this morning.
It was my pleasure, Riley. Thanks a lot.
I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation and that you'll join us again next time as we help you squeeze all the juice out of retirement. I'm Riley Moynes. Bye for now.